Hello, everybody. It is Mariah, otherwise known as Blue Moonstone, and today we are back with another Mining Mysteries video. In today's video, I am going to be telling you a few creepy creature stories, so let's get right into it. The stories prepared for Mining Mysteries may be disturbing for some viewers. Some stories may have graphic details not suitable for everyone. Viewers' discretion is advised. These stories are found on Reddit, so the legitimacy of them is unknown. It is up to you to decide whether or not you believe. Something's outside my apartment. I don't know if I'm losing my mind, but I need to write this somewhere before it gets worse. I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Not quite the city, but not the countryside either. It's one of those complexes with identical beige buildings, a half-empty parking lot, and a chain-link fence separating it from the strip of woods that no one really goes into, the kind of place where people keep to themselves. I've been here for 2 years. It's quiet, which I like, or at least it was. About 3 weeks ago, I started hearing this weird noise outside my window at night. Not just a random noise, it sounded like someone walking. Not heavy footsteps, but slow, dragging ones. Kinda like bare feet on pavement. At first I thought maybe it was one of my neighbors coming home late, or some raccoons going through the trash. But the sound didn't make sense. It would stop right beneath my window, stay there for a few minutes, and then move towards the fence that leads to the woods. After a few nights of that, I started looking out the blinds when I heard it, but I never saw anyone. Until the 5th night. That night, I was up late working on my laptop when I heard it again. Slow, scraping steps on the sidewalk below. I peeked through the blinds. The motion light by the parking lot flickered on, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing near the fence. It was tall, too tall, and thin, but the proportions were wrong, like someone who had been stretched out. I could see its outline in the yellow light. It had long arms that hung lower than they should have, and its head tilted like it was listening. Then the light turned off, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I told my neighbor the next morning, a woman named Danielle, who's lived here longer than I have. She looked uneasy when I mentioned the woods. She said that she's heard weird noises too, especially around 2 or 3 in the morning. Crying, sometimes. Could be coyotes, she said, but her voice didn't sound convinced. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was an animal. I even left my phone recording one night while I slept, just to prove it was nothing. When I played it back the next morning, most of it was silence until about 2:17 a.m. That's when I heard footsteps, then the sound like someone whispering really close to the microphone. It was too quiet to make it out, but it almost sounded like my name. The next night, I left my phone recording again, but when I checked in the morning, the file was corrupted, just static. Things got worse after that. I'd find the motion light by the parking lot on when I woke up, even though it's supposed to turn off automatically. My trash can got knocked over twice. Once, when I stepped outside in the morning, I noticed what looked like handprints on my window. Not fingerprints, full, flat palms, too long. The skin had left smudges like it was damp. I tried calling the building manager, but he brushed it off as just kids messing around. Then about a week ago, I got home from work and found something sitting outside my door. A dead rabbit. Its body looked twisted, like its neck had been turned completely around. I didn't even touch it, I just called maintenance, but when they came by, the body was gone. That night, I heard someone knock on my door, around midnight. It was 3 slow knocks. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there, but I could hear breathing. It was deep and uneven, like someone trying to imitate what breathing should sound like. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped. I didn't sleep that night again either. The next morning, I noticed muddy footprints leading from the front door to the sidewalk. Bare feet, large ones, with toes that were entirely too long. Danielle moved out 2 days later. She didn't even tell anyone. She just packed her car and left. I don't know what's happening here. Last night was the worst. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up because I heard something tapping on my bedroom window. I live on the 2nd floor, so there shouldn't be anything tapping on my window. When I looked, I saw a face pressed against the glass. It was pale, almost gray, and the eyes were too big. The mouth was open, moving like it was trying to form words, but no sound came out. Then, this part still makes my stomach turn. I realized it looked like me. The same eyes, the same hair, but just wrong. Like someone was wearing my face, but not knowing how to use it. I fell backward. I hit the nightstand, and by the time I had looked again, it was gone. I haven't told anyone else yet. I don't even know how to explain it. But tonight, as I'm typing this, I can hear it again. The dragging footsteps outside, moving up and down the sidewalk. Every few minutes, it stops right below my window. And I swear I just heard it whisper my name. I've worked at this morgue for years, but nothing prepared me for what came through this week. I've worked at a morgue in a restricted facility for 4 years now. I can't tell you where, it's classified, and honestly I wish I didn't know either. We don't get normal cases. Sometimes the bodies come sealed in double layers, tags replaced with alphanumeric strings instead of names. We're trained not to ask. Earlier this week, we received a body that I'd have to say broke every rule of what I thought was possible. It was something hard for me to fathom, but the senior pathologist, I'll call him M, didn't know how to process it either. The body was a male in his late 20s, no visible injuries and no signs of decay. No rigor mortis either, which was strange. Skin was cold to the touch, but soft, rather too soft. He had no vitals. The autopsy was scheduled for 0 hours. We placed him in a locker, locker C7. We cleaned our tools and logged the intake, and that was it. Except the locker door didn't frost over like the dozens of others that we have. It stayed clean and warm. We had an old landline on the far wall. We used it to call other departments down the corridor, say maintenance, logistics, the security. In most of our night shifts and in cases which we were deemed urgent or special care, like this one, it almost never rang. About 20 minutes in, after locking C7, the phone screamed. Yeah, it screamed. It didn't ring, it broke out in a jagged electric wail, like modem noise. I remember Em and I staring at it, expecting it to stop. But then the tone shifted dramatically. It started coming in bursts, short and long, repeating, almost rhythmic. I personally tried picking it up, but there was no receiver on the other end. Morse code? Em had joked. We broke into uneasy laughter, but the sound didn't stop. It died for a while, but then come back louder, noisier. The pattern was irregular, but it grew tighter, like a heart learning to beat again. To keep in check for any incidents that were to follow, I started recording it on my phone. We hadn't brought out the body for inspection yet. Just before we began, around midnight, I stepped out to the washroom to ensure I wasn't going to contaminate the subject. The phone hadn't died, it kept beeping, making the terrible sound. We thought better of jolting it out of the wall, since that would be against protocol. The air felt colder than usual, static, like it was crawling up my arms. Then the lights flickered, once and twice, and then complete darkness. I heard the phone still beeping erratically in that rhythm echoing the hall. Then came a scream, this time a human scream, followed by several metallic thuds and groans like a distant commotion. I ran back in. M was on the floor. He was convulsing, clutching his throat. A scalpel lay beside him. His white coat was blooming red from the chest. He tried to point at the upper corner of the room, gasping something that sounded like behind you, before his hand had dropped. The power had died completely, but the phone hadn't stopped. In the darkness, I saw several dark lines of crimson-colored liquid creeping from locker C7. It was left ajar, the metal almost torn. The locker door was hanging open, empty. I grabbed my torch and the emergency radio, stumbling towards the backup generator room in the dark. The hallway smelled wrong, like copper and wet meat. The corridors were streaked with red, finger marks smeared along the walls like something had been crawling. I could hear wet footsteps behind me, soft and irregular. The flashlight caught quick glimpses, a pale hand disappearing behind a corner, and the glint of eyes reflecting the beam. Then, near the generator, I found him. The body, the thing. It was curled up in a fetal position, smeared in blood like it had been bathing in it. Its eyes were open, but not seeing. They shone, catching my light in a way that no dead eyes could ever. It was shaking, small, violent tremors. The sound coming from its throat wasn't breathing, it was clicking, like the start of another code. It pulsated as the beeps from the phone catched with its bodily rhythm, like a beating heart fit into a pale corpse. I backed away in disgust. I tripped and hit my shoulder on the wall. The flashlight fell out of my hand and it looked straight up at me, eyes tearing from narrow slits, and it lunged. It hit me hard. Cold fingers dug into my chest. I felt something tear into my shoulder, razor sharp, like broken glass. The beeps from the phone grew more frantic. I slammed its head hard against the wall, and all of a sudden it collapsed, like a puppet. For a second it twitched, but it finally died as the phone's beeps faded out. Or so I like to think. I reported the incident to security. They reviewed the surveillance footage nonchalantly. "We should have let you know what you were dealing with," they remarked. They ultimately sealed locker C7, scrubbed it clean, took care of the body with an incinerator. But now I doubt why it was brought here in the first place. I tried decoding the landline's beeps from the recording I had on my phone. I triple-checked it. It definitely reads like a message. I hadn't had much luck, but here's the only meaningful phrase that I could place. Let me out. The Bone Eater. My father grew up deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of place where the trees swallow the sun by afternoon and the roads coil like snakes that don't want you to find their end. He worked hard to get out, worked himself bloody really. He went to college, met my mother, and moved several states away. He never talked much about the place that he came from, except to say that it wasn't fit for raising a child. He didn't speak to his parents or his brothers for years, not until well after I was born. I think it was one of his old friends, a man named Clyde, who told my grandparents that they had a granddaughter. After that, the letters started coming. Short at first, polite, handwriting that looked like it crawled out of another century, then an occasional phone call. Mom said she could barely understand my grandmother's voice, like the words were trying to claw their way out of her throat, she had said once. I didn't meet them until I was 5. That summer, my parents both took time off work to drive to the mountains. Memories are funny. The first trip comes back to me soft and hazy, like half-developed and weathered film. The first half of the trip was fun. We stopped for snacks and at the weird roadside museums, like the world's biggest rocking chair. But then the road started to twist and narrow. The air grew heavier, the trees pressed in closer until it felt like the forest was breathing with us. No billboards, no gas stations, no cell service, just trees and mountains. We finally reached my father's hometown, although calling it a town would have been generous. Really, it was just a few cabins hunched together at the base of a mountain, as if they were hiding. My father told me every family there was kin one way or another. The way he said it made my stomach turn, even then. The thing that stuck with me most, though, were the bones. Everywhere you looked, bones. Deer skulls nailed above doors, antlers arranged over windows, bones strung together to make wind chimes that clattered softly in the wind. Smaller ones, like squirrels, raccoons, rabbits, were carved into beads, buttons, even little figures. Even the baby's rattle had bones on it. There was one boy here wearing a necklace of teeth. I reached for it, but my father snapped, not just scolding, but he was scared. "Don't touch that," he hissed. Later that afternoon, I heard him arguing with my grandparents outside. Their voices drifted through the warm air towards me. His voice cracked when he said, "I left so she wouldn't be a part of this." I didn't understand what this meant, but I remember the sound of it, the way it carried like a warning. We didn't stay long. Mom said we were supposed to sleep at my grandparents' for a few nights, but right before dinner, she bundled me up into the car, trembling. We waited there while my father stayed behind. When he came out, his hands were shaking and his eyes were red and bloodshot. He didn't say a word on the drive home, and I didn't see them again until I was 10. My father got a call from his brother. Their grandfather, my great-grandfather, had died. My father said he was going home for the funeral. I begged him to take me with him. I think I wanted to understand, to see where I came from maybe. Mom looked at him like she already knew it was a mistake, but she didn't stop me from going. The road looked the same, but heavier this time, like the mountains had remembered me. The funeral was held in a clearing behind my grandparents' cabin. There was no church, just a rough wooden box and people whispering. My father and his brothers passed around a cloudy jug. The smell of it burned my nose. It was sharp and sour. But beneath it, I caught something else, something metallic and sweet. After the service, I stayed at my cousin's cabin. There was 3 of them. They were all boys, all older than me, while the adults went out to drink and grieve. My cousins told stories to pass the time. There was one that I remember very vividly. They called it the Bone Eater. They said it was a demon, older than the mountains, that fed on the souls of the lost. It could mimic voices, sometimes the cry of a baby, and sometimes the sound of your mother calling you home. It wore the hides and bones of what it killed and wandered the woods on nights when the moon was too bright to be trusted. They said if you ever heard someone call your name from the forest, you were already his. We laughed about it at first, but I remember one of the cousins glancing toward me and muttering, "She's got his eyes." I wasn't supposed to hear him. That night, long after my cousins fell asleep, I woke to a sound outside. A voice. It had said my name. Softly at first, but then again, closer. "Come out now, sweetheart." I should have been afraid, but my body moved on its own. I crept out of the cabin and stepped barefoot into the cold, damp air. The trees swayed like they were breathing, and the moonlight dot through the thick branches and leaves. I followed the whispers of the trees until I saw movement, a shape between the thick trunks. Something was covered in dark fur. At first, I thought it was a bear, but it stood upright. The fur was wet and dark, matted to a body that didn't look right. It was too long, too sharp. There was an aching, familiar, coppery, sickly sweet and rotting smell in the air. The figure was illuminated by a stream of moonlight, and I saw what appeared to be a man, his body draped in raw bear hide and slick with blood. Strings of bones and teeth hung from his neck and wrists. His face was smeared red, and his mouth was stained black around 2 sharp teeth. The blood was not his. He turned his head slowly, sniffing the air, and then he drifted away from the trees. Something inside me wanted to follow him into the night. There was a trail, a dark, glistening trail that reflected the moonlight, leading back the direction he had came. I followed it down to another cabin. The door was opening. The silence surrounding was suffocating. I remember stepping over the threshold and seeing red footprints on the floor. Then I saw the bodies. A woman, 3 children, and an old man. The woman's throat was gone, her head attached by meager strips of flesh and muscle. The face frozen in wide-eyed terror. The children were torn apart like rag dolls, horribly broken little dolls. The man's face looked peaceful, but his stomach was ripped open and his organs spilled out onto his lap. The thick smell of it made my eyes water. That's when I felt it. A warm breath on the back of my neck. Slow, wet, steady. I turned around slowly. I came face to face with the dead old man I had just been looking at. Only this version was wrong. Unsettling in a way that triggered the instincts bred into humanity since the beginning of time. It was the man in the bear fur, standing inches from me. His eyes were cloudy and gray, like dead fish. I could see myself in the reflection of his unblinking gaze. He tilted his head, studying me, and then he smiled. A slow, wet stretch of lips. He leaned in until his teeth brushed the fragile skin of my throat, and I heard a gurgling sound, almost like laughter. Then he pulled back, cupped my cheek with one blood-slicked hand, and whispered, "So pure." He whispered, his voice was like wet gravel, so sweet. He pressed something into my palm, a small leather cord with a long, curved jawbone and teeth strung through it. Then he laughed again, hollow and choking, and walked back into the trees. I stood there and watched him disappear into the trees, and I could still feel his breath against my throat. When I woke up the next morning, I was back in my cousin's cabin. My father was shaking me awake, saying that we were leaving. I still had the necklace in my hand. He told me later that one of the families down the road had been taken by an animal, but when I asked about it years later, he wouldn't talk. He'd just say, "You don't go back up there, ever." I still have that necklace, and sometimes late at night, I put it on. When the long and sharp teeth and bone press against my throat, I can almost feel his breath again. And when the wind picks up at night, I swear I can hear his voice in the trees, calling my name. Sometimes I want to follow it. Would he still think I'm pure? The box of distinctly human ribs and teeth hidden beneath the floorboards would say otherwise. I can't help my appetite. It's truly in my blood. The creature that made me quit working as a night auditor. I recently quit my job at a hotel as a night auditor due to the figure that came in at night. As part of my job, I have access to the cameras as I'm supposed to keep an eye on things around the hotel, such as making sure that no one's breaking in or damaging the property. Well, the cameras also cover the perimeter of the building, and every night, without fail, I see this thing staring at me. It only stays there for an hour or so until it drifts back into the darkness. It keeps moving closer, and a week ago on Monday was the very first night that it was standing right outside the glass door, roughly around 4 a.m. It was on the far end of the building from me, so I was still not terribly afraid, as if it opened the door I would have enough time to react and get out of there. However, my heart was still on edge. I just sat there watching it, trying to make out what it was, when its black eyes looked right at the camera, piercing my soul. I fell back into my seat and watched in horror as that camera had an error sign appear, followed by signal lost. It went black for a few seconds before flashing signal found. The image flashed back on and the figure was gone, nowhere to be seen. I checked the hallway cameras and luckily I didn't see anything. More time had passed, and I was glued to the cameras, checking every crevice of the hotel that the cameras could cover, seeing nothing. I felt like I was in a real-life Five Nights at Freddy's situation, but I had no control over locking the doors. Well, I could have, but then no guests would have been able to get in or out. And I definitely have issues with my boss. Luckily, that night finished like any other. However, I was even more joyful to see the sun glance over the nearby mountains. The next few nights I worked at the hotel were relatively boring. However, I'd gotten so used to seeing the figure standing somewhere outside, it felt uneasy not seeing it at all, especially how close it had gotten the last time. The nice thing was that I could access the camera which overlooked where I worked. I would constantly hop back between my desk and the back front desk when a guest needs help during my shift, and both of which were in view of the camera. A few nights back, after this had all gone down, during a shift I decided to do some digging, as there was no possible way I was the only one that worked here that had this issue before. I messaged a few of my coworkers that I had a good relationship with for their own personal experiences. The ones that worked during the day said they hadn't had any issues at all, and the other night auditor said she personally never had any experiences, but that Brian, who used to work here, had mentioned he'd seen something very similar. This gave me some relief as I didn't feel completely insane. Although intrigued, I asked my coworker if she still had Brian's contact. She did, and she forwarded it to me. I reached out to him through text, explaining it all, and I also mentioned that I was fine if he didn't reply at all, as I understood I was just some random stranger to him. But it didn't take long for him to reply. After sending the message, although I wished he hadn't, as what he wrote struck a shock of fear down my spine, he wrote back, "If it has gotten inside already, just quit and find a new job." I messaged, "Why? What happened?" He texted back, "Read the old notes I left in the staff spreadsheet back when I worked. It should be around July of 2024. Also, don't message me again as I don't want any connection back to that thing." He proceeded to block me, never replying to any of my other questions. I waited until my next shift to go over the old staff logs. I went through hundreds of old notes by the staff, with most of them saying things like, "So and so is requesting to move their room, check in early or late," and usual hotel staff notes. I used the find words on the page to help narrow my search. After searching the word figure, I saw it had a few responses pop up. I clicked on them and proceeded to read. The first one read, "Strange figure has been snooping around at night. I've investigated, but they always disappear before I get to them." The next few were similar until I read one that started out with, "I don't feel safe anymore," and I alerted the police, as the figure/man has been standing at the door looking in for over half an hour. Something felt off. Update, the man left before the cops arrived. It was interesting to see that nearly the same thing happened to Brian back in the day. I was nervous to find out what happens next, as I noticed that my time had just passed midnight during my shift. I'd still had 7 more hours until I could go home. With nothing but time on my hands, I kept reading. The man showed up again during my shift, but this time they were inside the hallway. I was weary of calling the police, as they weren't so happy last time I called them, and no one was there, so I didn't. That's all that was written on the staff note. The final one on the subject before the notes went back to normal hotel information being passed from shift to shift was, "The man stood outside the door to the employee front desk office for 3 hours. I had asked through the door for the person to move or leave, as I couldn't open the door without hitting them. and I got no response. I called the police, but it left before they got there. I checked Brian's employment record, and he had quit shortly after this event took place, not even giving a 2-week notice or anything. He didn't stay long enough to see what happens in the end, and I felt like I was the one who was going to do it. I quickly checked the cameras to see if I saw anyone or anything, although it was dead silent all across the hotel. We were only filled to 30% occupancy at the hotel, so it was a slow night. I glanced my eyes across the hotel cameras, and then I saw my worst nightmare. The figure was inside the building. It stood there in a dark space that lies in between the shining ceiling lights from above. My heart dropped. I knew that it was only going to get closer. I watched it intently, not knowing what to do, as calling the police would be fruitless. I made sure the staff door was locked, and I sat down at the camera over the part of the hallway where the figure stood was completely black, besides for a white circle. I stared at it and double-clicked it to make it enlarge. I checked the feed to see if the internet had cut out, but it was live. The white circle disappeared and reappeared in a split second. I was baffled by what I was seeing and was wondering if I should check on the camera, although I already knew that I was too scared to do so, and I would wait until the morning when it was light. After the white circle flicked for a few seconds, I noticed something peculiar. It looked kind of like the white of someone's eyes, although the pupils seemed to be pitch black, taking up the whole center. I was staring at an eyeball. Horrified, I sat there immovable as I felt my very soul being pierced through that gaze. The feed to the camera cut out as it had done before, and then when it went back to normal, the figure was gone. I didn't know what to do. My next shift would probably be where it stands at the door, and I was not mentally prepared for that. The rest of the night was fairly normal. Besides a strange black and white cat that walked around the side of the building, it also seemed to be on edge by how it kept glancing back behind itself every few steps before darting off into the darkness. I was very ready to go home after that. Although, after getting home, when I was trying to fall asleep after my shift, I felt dread building up in my pit. It was sunny outside, and I had a light dampening curtains because of my job. However, I was too scared to draw them back, so I hopped straight into bed, covered my face in the covers, and drifted off to sleep. In my dream, all I could see was the white circle. My body was stiff, like thick concrete, and I felt completely trapped. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Attempting to wake myself up, I shook my body rapidly, and that did the trick. However, only my consciousness was awake, while my body felt paralyzed. It felt hard to breathe, and I noticed my room was pitch black, even though I had left the curtains open. I could feel a presence in the corner of the room, and I could see two white circles resembling severely dilated eyes staring at me. It then proceeded to deform and start crawling on the ground towards me. My heart was empty as it crawled onto my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything but stare at it. Scared to death, I passed out and woke up to my curtains drawn and the afternoon sun rays resting on the bedroom floor. I was so relieved to have had that dreadful nightmare over, as I never had felt that sensation before. Looking it up, it fit the perfect picture of a sleep paralysis demon, and I'm glad that so many other people have experienced similar things. However, it still didn't rest easy with me that I was going to work that same night. I dreaded it with all my being and felt like doing what Brian did and just quitting, although I would feel bad for my colleagues that would get stuck covering my shift until they found someone to replace me. So I just decided to show up to work anyway. I brought a small pocket knife with me that I kept concealed. It added at least some comfort. Upon starting my shift, I did the usual opening shift tasks like cleaning and wiping things down and reading over the staff notes of the day, but there weren't too many guests staying over at the hotel that night either, which made me even more uneasy, as that means there would be less people up and about. I'd much rather deal with someone yelling at me for something than whatever that thing was that I was waiting for. Another hour flew by until it was 1 a.m., and still nothing. I started to feel a little bit better about the situation, and I leaned back in my chair while pulling up a movie, as we were allowed to do what we want, as they mainly need a warm body present to help hotel guests in the middle of the night. Anyways, I'm watching Parks and Recreation when I saw one of the cameras flicker. Pausing the show, I leaned in to see that it was the camera that was down the hall from the door I was behind at the front desk area. I began trembling as I knew what was next, and I watched the door like a hawk. However, it never appeared. I sat there staring intently until I saw another flicker on one of the cameras, and it was the one in the office where I was sitting. The camera in that office is behind me as it films the rest of the office. I felt as stiff as a board as I felt a cold presence behind me. The figure was right behind me, and I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, and my body didn't move an inch. I didn't dare look behind me, but there was nothing I could do, so I just sat there for a full hour, motionless. That thing didn't flinch an inch. Cold wind brushed against the hairs on the back of my neck that stood straight. It was as if it was the breath of the creature. The phone near the front desk began ringing. Wanting so badly to answer it, I slowly began to move. I watched the camera as I did this to see if there was any movement from the thing, but there was none. I continued to slowly swivel my chair while keeping my attention forward. I stood up. Walking to the front desk, I answered the call, and it was someone in one of the rooms asking about what time breakfast was. I answered him in the coldest voice I've ever had, as I couldn't even pretend to have an ounce of joy. He seemed put off and didn't have enough time to say anything as I hung up. Afterwards, I looked forward to the window and saw the reflection of the thing standing from the back desk that I had left with the cameras displayed open. It hadn't moved an inch. I took 3 breaths, mustering all of the courage I could, and quickly flashing open my pocket knife, I turned around, but there was nothing. The figure was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief. However, I was too horrified to go back there, so I stayed at the front desk until the end of my shift. I went home, I called my boss, and I quit. I mailed my uniform back as I didn't even want to step foot near that place again, and I haven't been back since. And I still have no idea what that thing was. All I know is I won't be the last one to experience that.